Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
On the eve of this great adventure, I send my best wishes to every soldier in the Allied fleet.
The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
All the beauty of the world was gone. Nothing mattered now except this brutal moment and survival. It was almost as if everything that came before, home, childhood, family, maybe even previous battle experiences, had never really happened. Or perhaps all of that simply no longer had any significance. The same could be said of the future, if indeed there was to be a future for any of them. Actually, to some, the very idea that there could even be a future seemed absurd in the extreme. Instead, there was only the ugly, overwhelming, drab, miserable here and now, and it was stunning beyond imagination. Death lurked everywhere, in the rough waters, on the ramps of wobbly landing craft, in every wet grain of sand, behind every log or steel obstacle, alongside every mine, buried or unburied, near the blanket of smooth stones that composed a bizarre-looking shingle. There was nowhere to hide. At least not for any real safety, and certainly there was nowhere to escape. They were trapped, quite possibly, even doomed. Well, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk USA with me, Al Murray, James Holland, and the man who penned those very words.
Yeah, that's a fantastic description, isn't it? I mean,
it's an excellent. But that's from your prologue, John, to your Omaha book about Omaha Beach.
Which is completely brilliant, everyone. And if you haven't got it and you want to know about Omaha Beach, it is just the only book to read, really. Well, no, I'm being quite serious. If your thing is Omaha Beach and you want to know what's going on Omaha Beach, that is the book to have, because it's got genuinely fresh perspectives and research onto it. But you're talking about a book that's being written by one of the foremost historians of World War II in the world, and an American scholar. And that is, of course, our very own John McManus.
Oh, man. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate that, guys. With that kind of build-up, I feel pressure now. Like, oh, my God, I better say something profound.
Well, that's exactly our intention, John. We want you under pressure, stressing yourself out, reading, talking about this. The Dead and Those About to Die is the name of the book. And I mean, you lay out in it, Omaha's been for you a battle that's like been there in your imagination and your thinking, and sort of in your personal culture, if that's the way to put it.
Even before Saving Private Ryan.
Way before. I mean, even when I was in kindergarten, first grade, 5, 6 years old, I've always been drawn to this and absolutely fascinated with it. And even before I became an historian, I was studying it, and it's just been through my whole life, I've been immersed in this on some levels. And so when it came time to start a book about it, I thought, well, what most characterizes this experience for those who are there? And it just seemed to me that the world would have had no beauty, no redeeming, all the things we value in life that each day, that make life good for us, that they earn for us, honestly. But you know what I mean? All those things would have been gone in that moment. It occurred to me in favor of just this horrible circumstance. And so I wanted to really kind of immerse on that level, because, when we pull back the lens, and a lot of times we do as historians, we say, well, there's only, 1,200 Germans there, and the Americans are going to prevail and the Allies are going to win this war and all these things they have going in their favor. But you know what? I don't think any of that matters when we are assault troops at Omaha Beach, especially at H hour, which is one of the worst times to be there. How is that relevant on any level? Life could end in 2 seconds, and it's still a terrible, deadly mess. And so I wanted to kind of start from that base point and then maybe get an understanding of the experience, as you can as an historian, I guess. But then, why things happen the way they do.
The attacking troops of the 116th Infantry and the 16th Infantry, so 116th from the 29th Infantry Division, who are new boys, the 16th Infantry from the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division, who are really experienced. So you've got the kind of experienced division, inexperienced division, side by side, one on the right, one on the left. Why is it that a company of the 116th is going in first? How are they chosen? Ditto with the 16th Infantry. Why not the 18th Infantry? Who's choosing who gets to die first? Effectively, I mean, that's what it boils down to. And why is it that why are they landing at the Colville draw and the Verville draw? Why not land in the middle where there's gaps between the strong points? I mean,
Well, that is the plan.
So they're not trying to land at the strongest points.
No, I mean, they're trying not to. And so this is what just, how like you can plan, and then things go wrong. And sometimes they go terribly wrong, and Murphy's Law and all that awful stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, they're planning to land in the gaps because I think the planners understand that the Widerstandsness, create certain kill zones on Omaha Beach, generally in relation to the draws, which is the key terrain to get off the beach, of course. And so what we want to do is we want to land in the dead spots. And the classic example would be sort of the heart of Easy Red sector. And maybe farther along east than Dog Green, of course, closer to Dog White and whatever. But the tides, the confusion, the pre-invasion bombardment that creates a lot of smoke and dust, the mines, the obstacles. Of course, the Germans had a vote in this too, and they understand what is going to be the sort of gravitational pull of the tides and whatever else. And so they want to draw us toward the deadliest spots too. And the design, the obstacle belt and the mines are designed to do that as well. So all of this creates a situation.
So they're not just so your Belgian gates and what have you, and your hedgehogs and all the rest of it. They're not just sort of put there willy nilly. There's a design to it.
There's an absolute design to it, and not just here, but at other beaches too. They're designed to kind of funnel you into what is going to be the deadliest parts of the beaches. Yeah. And so Omaha Beach is no different. It's probably just more formidable in this regard, and it's been
because
built
of the
up.
bluffs.
Because of the bluffs, yeah, and the crescent shape, which creates that kind of bracketing, enfilading fire, and the bluffs create the plunging fire, and the tides and all this. And they figured we'd probably come in at high tide too, but we're going to come in at low tide because the Navy feels it needs to see the obstacles and the mines as much as possible, which totally makes sense, So the bottom line is this is supposed to be a perfectly timed combined arms assault in which everyone has a role. The anti-aircraft people, who I think are often overlooked, because they're going to land with their stuff and just fire at those pillboxes and keep the Germans' heads down, in addition to the tanks that have the same kind of role. The gap assault teams of engineers that are going to blow gaps, hopefully, in the obstacle belt, and then the infantry making the main assault. Instead, we land in these kind of clumps, piecemeal, in various groups, and we land in basically the kill zones, like you said, Jim, Able Company 116th, right at the snout of the Vierville draw of some of the toughest fortifications. And then, to the east, E and F Company 16th Infantry, right under what is WN 62, that place you can visit today. And it really doesn't take much. It's one of the things I love about Omaha Beach is you can just go there and you can get a sense immediately why it's so deadly. Yeah. You stand at WN62, you see that slope to the beach, you're like, oh my goodness, anybody down there is just dead. I mean, yeah.
Why are those units chosen to be in the first wave? I mean, someone's got to be. Is it just a lottery? Is it something to do with the officers? Is it, why them? Why is it that A Company is coming in and having the misfortune of being struck by 2 mortars?
So my impression is that the 116th, of course, the people choosing it are the division commanders primarily. Charlie Gerhardt for the 29th and Clarence Hubner for the Big Red One, although Hubner has total operational control on the morning and day of the assault, that the 29th is technically under his control and whatever. But it's basically the division commanders who have decided these are the regiments within my division that I think are best prepared for the actual H-hour assault. So it's a bit of a prestige factor, though.
Yeah,
I'm looking at that from a colonel's point of view rather than a private's point of view.
Don't be too keen in training. Then is the
Exactly.
message.
Yeah. I know. Here's your reward. I know.
Yeah.
So the
Thanks a lot.
116th was led by a remarkable leader, Colonel Canham, who is just really very high speed. And I think that Gerhardt recognized that. And also George Taylor, the commander of the 16th Infantry, is really one of the leading American authorities on amphibious invasions, as of the spring.
Because they've done lots of them. He's been at Iran, he's been in Jela,
exactly.
in Italy, etc.
And he's done a lot of thinking about it, a lot of doctrinal thinking, a lot of conceptual thinking, a lot of philosophical thinking about what amphibious invasions are. And I think that's what's interesting about Taylor is looking at his memos that he wrote the previous fall. And so that's what really struck me when I was doing research for this book. We all know the phrase, the dead and those about to die, get off the beach and all that. And unfortunately, wrongly attributed to Dutch Coda in The Longest Day, which I think is just awful. But it's Taylor who said them, and it's Taylor who wrote those words back in the fall. So he was thinking that far ahead and understanding what to speak because he'd done it. Yeah, I mean, he wrote, like in a training memo, he said there's two classes of people, the dead and those who are about to die. And I was just like, wow, he's thinking about it even then. So he's rehearsed this by the time he comes ashore, which is about an hour and a half after H-hour. So I think if I'm Clarence Hubner, this is somebody I really am going to trust with what is the key moment of the assault.
And Taylor's thing's aggression and simplification, isn't it? That's his attitude, isn't it? Is that everything's too complicated and that there's no substitute for aggression, basically.
Aggression, absolutely. That once you get ashore, you got to be doing something and you got to be aggressive. And that really means getting off the beach initially. And of course, it's eventually going to mean destroying any Germans you see, whether on or off the beach.
It's also a very challenging beach, isn't it? Because at very low tide, it's sandy. So that bit's okay because it's nice and firm and you can run quite quickly. But nearer the top, as you get closer to the sea wall, it's all shingle there. And that's incredibly difficult to move over fast, particularly if you're going uphill.
It really is. And this is...
It's so hard. If anyone hasn't... I mean, we've all tried being on a shingle beach. Try running on it. It's really hard.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim, because it's another way you can relate to it a little bit all these years later going to Omaha Beach, because a lot of those same stones are still there. And they get wet and they slope a little upward. The shingle bank isn't as dramatically sloped as it was then, but you can get a sense of just how difficult the footing would be, much less obstacles and barbed wire and mines, and you're in boots and you're carrying 80 pounds of stuff and you're wet. So just footing is difficult.
And more than that, if you're on sand and you're damp sand, that bullet will just go straight in, or that shell will go in, and the damp sand will absorb most of it. But on shingle, it won't. It'll splitter, and shards of the rock and the pebbles are every bit as lethal as the shrapnel.
And the rocks are very rounded, very sort of polished and rounded, which makes them more slippery. And I would argue probably makes them more dangerous in the sense, like what you said, the fragmentation effect. And so when you're at the shingle bank, like taking cover, there's an illusion of safety because you probably are sort of sheltered from machine gun fire or maybe sniper fire. I don't know, depending where you are. But certainly not mortar and artillery fire, which are the biggest killers. Wounders at Omaha Beach and anywhere else, right? So,
well, I mean, two entire LCAs get killed, don't they, by mortars landing into the LCA? Is that not right?
For Able Company, the 116th, they do lose everybody on one of their boats. I'm a little skeptical whether everybody is killed on the other one. What you often hear, and this is one of the things I wanted to investigate when I did the book, is you'd hear veterans say, well, that landing craft got hit and everybody was killed. So the more you really look at it, it's like, well, that's pretty unusual, for the Germans to be able to kill every single person aboard a landing craft. It's actually usually 6-7 people get killed, several others wounded, some in the water, some scattered. That tends to be the pace of events more so than everybody being killed in a landing craft. The Germans,
but you also don't know whether you also don't know what the immediate after effects of that. So the mortar shell lands in, kills 6, let's say, or 7, wounds another similar number.
Well, if no one comes out of the landing, if no one comes out of the landing craft because they're, it looks like everyone's been killed, and that kind of rumor or impression is easy to take and spread. Yeah.
But also, you don't know what the consequences are on the landing craft and the crew, and your ability to maneuver it to the shore and lower the ramp, or perhaps the mortar shell has already lowered the ramp and that causes flooding, and could be any number of those things.
And it's combat ineffective. I mean, even if everybody isn't dead, it's maybe combat ineffective. Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot. And the mortar shell thing, that's a pretty lucky shot for the Germans to be able to move, to get a mortar shell to hit a moving landing craft or whatever. I tend to think for the actual landing craft, when they're coming ashore, the bigger threat to you right at that moment are those 50 millimeter guns, 50. Like you've got at WN65, you've got a pedestal gun at WN61. You've got these sprinkled among the beach, and those are very accurate, flat trajectory weapons that can really nail any kind of moving landing craft, versus the mortars that have the parabola that, when I launch that shell, that may or may not be relevant to where the landing craft's going to be 5 seconds from now.
Right. But these are high velocity anti-tank guns, aren't they? Basically,
yeah,
that's what you're talking about.
And they'll hold those landing craft, and they will really do tremendous damage. Yeah.
But what are the Americans expected to be greeted by, though, at Omaha? What do they know about the state of German defences? Because after all, you've your plan, and that's made in light of what you think the enemy are going to do. What are they expecting, and what are they training for?
So we've actually got a pretty good sense of what Omaha Beach is and how it's defended right up to the moment when we launched the assault. So in the weeks leading up to D-Day, there had been a lot of photo recon that had shown just how much the Germans are building up the obstacle belt and all of that. And so there's a lot of concern that goes all the way up to, 5th Corps. Giro, and that's where the gap assault teams come from. The idea of these Army Navy engineers to deal with these gaps. So you certainly see that at Utah Beach too, but I don't think quite to the same level. So we understand that, and then of course French resistance has been getting their reports of the presence of the 352nd. And what's so interesting about that is Hubner and his regimental commanders know all about it. When they go in, that morning, D-Day, say, hey, these guys are here. And their dilemma is, should we tell our assault companies? And they also decide, nothing will be served by that. Let them go do what they're going to do. And so it creates this whole mythology that you'll see in the initial after action reports. The president of the 352nd was just a pure accident. They happened to be there on maneuvers on D-Day. And we've all heard that yarn, haven't we? And that gets emphasized in the sort of narrative of Omaha Beach. And because I think it appeals much more to us, that sort of randomness of war, of here's Murphy's Law playing out again, versus we're misfiring on our intel. And we really knew this, and the average soldier should have known it better. So that's very unglamorous. But, regardless, you were going to attack the beach anyway. Whether these guys are there or not, you had to have it. So in the end, I guess maybe Hubner's right on that.
The thing is, because what we did talk about in the episode we did is that because of the limitations of the landing craft, not in their standard platoons, are they? They've been rearranged. What effect does that have on the GIs who are having to deal with that? Because that can be a big thing to have to deal with, isn't it? If it's a sergeant you don't know or men you don't know.
Yeah, you have been reorganized from standard platoons of 36 to 40 into boat sections of 32 because that's what we can fit. Now that allows you to disperse your combat power a little bit more too, I suppose. But yeah, you have to reorganize at that basic squad and platoon level.
That 32 also has to include some engineers, doesn't it?
Yeah. So everybody has a distinct job, and I think this is sometimes what even we as deep dive historians sometimes overlook in relation to D-Day as a whole. But here, we're talking about Omaha Beach. Where you are on that landing craft is not random. It's not just, okay, we're all going down the ropes and we all jump in and, Jim's here and Al's there and I'm right behind them or something. No, everybody is in a distinct spot where they're supposed to be standing. What they do the minute that ramp go down is choreographed depending upon what your job is. So like you said, Jim, there could be engineers, and that could mean somebody with Bangalore torpedoes, could be a bazooka team. There's a machine gun team. There's our mortar team. Okay, they're going to be in the sort of middle to midsection of the landing craft. We've got our assault riflemen up front, and we've got our leader, our boat section leader, or really platoon leader. You'll often notice that guy with the vertical hash mark on the back of his helmet, that's our lieutenant, who is going to lead. And that is the idea. And at the back of the landing craft is our ranking NCO with the horizontal hash mark, and he's the push man. It's really similar to the airborne.
Right.
You know, if I'm the platoon leader and the ranking guy in a stick, I'm expected to lead the way out the door, whereas my ranking NCO is probably the last guy out because he's literally pushing everybody out, sort of that coercive NCO leadership of like, don't think about staying on this plane. That's not an option for you. Just like that in the boat, too. You're not staying on this boat.
But John, what does that splitting up of conventional platoons do in terms of leadership?
Yeah, well,
does that have any knock-on effect or not really?
I think it's a challenge for platoon leaders because you don't have as much combat power in your boat. In your action, you know, like, here are my guys. I've got them right here. So I think it's a bit of a challenge organizationally on that side of the house. I think it rests more on the shoulders of NCOs, which is fine. Both divisions at Omaha Beach have a pretty solid NCO corps. And I know the 29th is an experience, but as we've discussed this many times, that doesn't mean you're a bad unit. In some ways, you're better sometimes than a veteran unit because you'll take more chances and be more aggressive sometimes. You have a nice sweet spot of these two divisions with the fresh new guys, hyper trained for this, and then the saltier guys. But let's remember, even in the bigger Red One, about half the guys are new because of the casualties they've taken to the Mediterranean. Now, granted, they've been inculcated in the culture of a veteran unit by now, too, yes. But so you've got enough good NCOs, either by experience or by training. It kind of staves off whatever disorganization and problems you might have had by having to reorganize to your platoons and whatever else in these boats.
But in terms of the kind of violence on Omaha Beach, it really is, isn't it? The two main exit points from the beach around there, where there's a cluster of strong points. And in those opening moments, because, by 8 o'clock, it's still incredibly dangerous, but it's definitely getting a lot easier. 90 minutes in, you're starting to get reductions on the defenses. And don't forget, of course, that each of these 50 millimeter guns, they're firing from embouchures that are going along the beach rather than out to the sea. So the front is protected. But even so, when you're a crew and you're getting hammered by rounds, you're not going to be kind of firing with quite the same levels of diligence as you would be if you weren't being fired at.
Yeah, most definitely not. And the classic
and
example
that's what saves a total slaughter rate. I mean, that's the difference between... That's what enables these guys to eventually get off the beach and start moving. Yeah, you can't kill everyone if they're running.
Exactly. So that the one of the guns that's neutralized is at WN61. And it's basically neutralized by Staff Sergeant Raymond Strozny, who gets a bazooka and kind of shames several other guys into moving along with him to kind of just plink away at this position where the Germans have this pedestal gun and the ammo next to it. And what really persuades the Germans that they shouldn't stay in this fight is when they hit the ammo, when Strozny scores a hit on the ammo, and then the German crew is like, ooh, it's getting pretty dangerous here. So it's not always a matter of just blowing the actual gun up, like you said, Jim. It's a matter of sort of dissuading the enemy crewmen from staying in the fight. And you see something of the same dynamic of the 50 millimeter gun in the famous pillbox at WN65, which is still there. And all of us had visited that, and anybody who goes to Normandy tends to visit that because the gun's still in there. The gun's still in there for a reason. We never actually destroy the gun itself. We basically just make the position combat ineffective in the course of the day. And this is another thing that's just... It's just something that kind of makes you shake your head as an historian, because we weren't part of this, so maybe we will never be able to understand the emotion of it on this level. Just an absolute, almost vitriolic argument among different veterans group of who neutralized that gun position. The anti-aircraft guys with like the half tracks that have anti-aircraft guns on them, versus the individual soldiers with bazookas, versus tanks, versus the destroyers. And my answer as an historian is all of the above. You've all done great things here. why does one of us have to have ownership of this somehow? I mean, I can't understand that, but I wasn't there, I guess. So maybe that's a blind spot on my part.
But also, I mean, if you're manning a machine gun, you're not pointing so much down the side of the beach. That's a little bit more kind of full frontal. And again, if you've got kind of horizontal light anti-aircraft Bofors guns and cannons kind of, quads kind of firing at you, or destroyers coming up very close and within 1,000 yards and pumping their guns towards you, you're not going to be aiming with the greatest kind of accuracy as you might be if you're not under attack. I mean, the thing is the cacophony of noise, even if you're in a concrete emplacement, dust is coming down. The sound is absolutely immense. It's ringing in your ears. Show me the guy who's going to just calmly kind of keep firing his gun. I mean, some of them will do it, but majority won't. And particularly if you're a disinterested kind of Russian or Pole or a soldier in German uniform rather than a German. What's in it for you? I mean, and again, this is why they are able to get this foothold. This is why they're able to get across the beach, because if all those German defenders were firing at maximum efficiency, they would be gunned down by machine guns and 50 millimeters and 75s and all the rest of it. And yet they're not. So,
yeah, it's a matter of sort of dissuading them from continuing to fight, and that's a matter of human will, isn't it? I mean, and that impact, the firepower impacts, like you said, Jim, the noise of it. I mean, who among us could really stand that for long? And then the wounds start to build up, right? I mean, maybe it starts as light wounds, as shards of concrete fly around and nicks you in the neck, and then all of a sudden it's a guy who's had half his shoulder blown apart. By fragments. So this just sort of builds up in the course of the day. And for the German perspective, that becomes the dynamic, is that you're wondering, when is reinforcement coming? Is it coming? Communications are spotty with higher headquarters. That's part of their problem too. Although I would point out, not necessarily at the artillery piece level. And this is another reason why Omaha Beach is quite deadly, is that the pre-invasion bombardment has done nothing to neutralize the communications of forward observers who are calling for fire from inland batteries, which are really the deadliest weapons the Germans have. For all our fixation on the concrete bunkers and pillboxes, it's those 105 millimeter batteries that are positioned a couple miles away that are really the biggest killers, really cause the whole beach is pre-sighted, and it doesn't take much effort. It's just like, bing, here's this little code word, and here comes a lot of this 105s down. So as long as those communications are in place, that's an incredibly deadly weapon. So whether they can control their communications with higher headquarters, that does matter. But also that other firepower matters a lot. And so it's one of the things that's also going to cause us as ordinary soldiers to restrict our mobility and to tend to hunker down and try and take cover, often behind the obstacles. So it's not just the machine guns that are coming in. It's the artillery fire. Just like in any other circumstance, we go to ground, don't we? And we can't continue there because the tides are coming in, very much onrushing. That's what's different from another battlefield.
And John, I remember talking to a U.S. Army Ranger who'd been at Iran and then Sicily, and I remember him saying to me, that bit in Saving Private Ryan where the Tom Hanks character suddenly can't hear, and he's just completely, totally discombobulated by the experience, in total shock. He said that happened to me when they were landing further up the beach at in Sicily, and I mean, you've done some work because your wife Nancy helped you with this, didn't she?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this, Jim, because I learned a lot. We all do when we do our books. It's like, wow, I'm learning brand new things here. That's the whole point. So it's called acoustic trauma. So yeah, my wife is an audiologist. She practiced many, many years. And in case you've never heard of the field, it's basically like a doctor of hearing. And so she told me there's a phenomenon that when you are sort of concussed like that from explosions, loud noise, whatever it would be, that there's this sort of loss of equilibrium that you have. And I'm only explaining it in a layman's way, but kind of an inner ear imbalance that creates a loss of equilibrium, a kind of loss of hearing, and a disorientation that is generally called acoustic trauma. And it's one of the things that I thought was so well portrayed in the movie is how, Hanks's Captain Miller character is sort of almost in a trance in a way. And then all of a sudden, the world comes back into focus, sort of. Remember, these are young, resilient people. And so just the way the sound is manipulated of all of a sudden now you hear the machine gun bullets again. And then there's a guy saying, what the hell do we do now, sir? Right in front of you. And it's like, okay, I can see this guy. I can hear him. But until that happens, you are in a state of acoustic trauma. And I found a number of instances, too, at Omaha Beach where that very thing happened. And I just thought it was kind of a fascinating aspect to this, the physiological aspects of what was happening if you were part of that assault. And it's not just, of course, the acoustic trauma. It's the vasoconstriction that you have from being so incredibly frightened. It literally narrows your vision. Your heart rate is completely out of control. Your motor skills begin to degrade. All of that obviously is from fear, and it can happen to any of us in any circumstance. Training is designed to overcome that, but gosh, that's training and this is reality. So all that vasoconstriction, I think, too, perhaps could affect acoustic trauma because there's less blood flowing to the ears too, or maybe your eardrums have burst.
Yeah.
And that then makes it that much more challenging.
You're concussed, aren't you, by blast too? So it's a combination of all of it. We're going to take a very, very quick break, and then we shall return, and I will be asking John about DD tanks, because that's what British people seem to want to talk about. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk USA with me, Al Murray, James Holland and John McManus. Now, John, you did mention tanks when discussing, the sort of effects of firepower on the beach and who did what and who claims credit for what. There are DD tanks at Omaha. Very often, it's sort of sometimes, in sort of pop accounts of this, sort of, there's a kind of suggestion that they're a brilliant British invention and that those silly old Americans don't know how to use them. And if only they did, things might have gone rather different for the poor old silly Americans. We've talked a bit about this in the episode where we talked about Omaha Beach. What's going on with the armor in this situation? What happens?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, armor is a big part of the Battle of Omaha Beach. We tend to think of the infantry, the engineers and all that with good reason, but armor is a huge part of this, part of the plan. And armor has a significant effect on the Battle of Omaha Beach, just not as much as it could have had we been able to actually get all our tanks in there. And so this is where the DD or duplex drive or amphibious or swimming tanks, whatever you want to call them, where they come into play. And we've basically got, 30 some odd of these for both sides of the beach. So 60 plus tanks. And it's funny what you mentioned, Al, with the idea of these silly Americans not knowing what to do, because I think there's some level of truth to that on this level. On the 1st Infantry Division side of the house, the decision of whether to launch the DD tanks and have them swim in is made by an Army officer. And, he's looking at it from his perspective of, well, we trained up in these things. We know how to use them. And this is how we're supposed to use them. So regardless of how choppy the seas are, I think we should launch. Whereas on the 29th Division side, the call is made by a naval officer who understands much better about what's going to happen to these tanks in this heavy surf, So we have, famously, we lose 27 out of 32 on the Big Red 1 side that sink. And we lose an average of 1 crewman per tank. But, in spite of that adversity, we're going to bring ashore many dozens of tanks, mainly by landing craft on D-Day, which is, and that's the other thing about the DD tanks that's always struck me. It's like you're solving a problem that doesn't really exist. We've already figured out how to bring tanks ashore on LCTs, right? And they're wader tanks. We've all seen those tanks with the special exhaust plumes, whatever you call them. We've got that at Omaha Beach. We've got it elsewhere in Normandy. Why do we need to swim ashore? I think it was designed as sort of this shock weapon, maybe that it's just going to freak the Germans out. And
the main reason is so that you don't have the LCTs blocking the advance. So because they're huge, they're 50 meters long, and what you don't want is if you put them onto the beach, you've got these narrow channels through the beach obstacles. There's then no room for because then they've got to get off, then they've got to pull back out again, get out of the way. Then the LCAs are, and the Higgins boats have got to arrive, and it's just they're too big. So the idea is to the LCTs go in first, out go the tanks. The tanks go in, and they can sort of beetle in between the beach obstacles, which then leaves the passage through the beach obstacles for the LCAs and LCVPs to get in. That's the principle behind it. But I kind of agree with you, because there's lots of occasions where the Royal Navy officers or the naval officers make the right call and take them all the way in. And what they do on Gold Beach, for example, is they go, okay, you were going to go in first, but we're not going to let you go in first. The infantry will go in first, and you'll go immediately afterwards. So they then do a big circling maneuver, and by the time they finish their circle, they're then behind the LCAs, and they just come in straight in behind.
Which is smart.
I do hope we're not dissing British armoured ingenuity here, gentlemen.
We're definitely not. Quite the opposite, actually. It's just like, use it correctly, right?
The interesting thing is they have got a plan. There is a plan in place for bad weather, which is this. Okay, so we'll circle around and come in immediately behind rather than being at the front. No one's expecting it. So it's kind of just, this is what's going to happen, but it's so much at the kind of back of the filing cabinet in your mind that most people just aren't thinking about that plan B. And what should have been prepared, and all that preparation they're doing, is a much more kind of solid plan B. If it gets to kind of
Force 5, this is what we do.
Well, Force 2.
Yeah, Force 2. Yeah.
Force 2,
yeah.
This is the drill. This is plan B, and this is how you enact it. Because clearly, sending out a 30-ton tank, cutting across the prevailing wind from 6,000 yards, which, let's face it, is 4 miles or something,
a long
is
way.
Absolutely ridiculous.
It is. In those kind of choppy seas, and it just makes no sense, and it's really sad.
But John, the other thing the British do is have AVRI and stuff like that. The armored vehicle Royal Engineers stuff. Those sort of assault armored combat engineer vehicles. Why do the Americans not go down that route?
So my impression has been that they felt that there was enough actual engineering units dedicated to this with enough equipment, explosives, Bangalore torpedoes, all this kind of stuff, that it could function in something of that same role. And if we've got a limited amount of landing craft and shipping, which we do, we want to devote that to more tank support in the manner we've just discussed. Say at Sword Beach or Gold Beach or Juno, well, not so much Juno, but at Gold and Sword particularly, you haven't got big dunes, but you've got immediately off the beaches, you've clearly got areas where there's going to be lots of mines. So there's an advantage to having a flail tank that can just flail it all up straight away, because it just drives off the beach. I mean, where's your flail tank going to operate on Omaha Beach? It's going to be on the beach itself. It's going to be on the beach. You don't need that. It's not going to get over the seawall. It's not going to get over the anti-tank ditch. It's just a complete waste of time. There's no role for a crab on Omaha Beach at all. It just wouldn't work for that, especially as you're working your way up the bluffs. And so you're just going to need more engineers for that. Sort of the peril, if you come in later in the day, these sort of supposed cleared paths that are about as wide as our shoulders, that you're working your way off the beach that way in these straight lines of very uncomfortable troops. That's if you're, say, in the 18th Infantry or the 115th, or later on the 26th and the 175th. But that's, of course, much later in the day. But mines are always a real problem. And John, the beach does start to get cleared because strong points get knocked out, and they get knocked out by naval fire, by these Bangalore torpedoes and people making breaches, and but tanks. Also just by dogged and by tanks, because I think the single 88 millimeter is knocked out by a Sherman, isn't it? If I remember rightly. Yeah. Here's what's so interesting about that is that the two tanks that do swim in for the 741st Tank Battalion. Like on Easy Red. Make a big impression, don't they? They do. They basically knock out the 81 and the 75s up at WN62. So you get a lot of bang for your buck there.
Right. So had they been launched more sensibly, it might have tipped things quicker.
I think it could have saved a lot of infantry lives, just in my opinion. Although I think we have to maybe step back and think about the challenge of being a tanker, especially a tank driver. in that situation that morning, I mean, there's no room to maneuver once you're ashore because of the, we were talking about with the obstacles, and the gap assaultines haven't been able to blow paths too much because a lot of times the infantrymen are taking cover behind the obstacles. You've got all these bodies lying on the beach. You don't know whether the guy is alive or dead. Whether that's a wounded guy. Try and maneuver around them. You don't want to run over your own guys, even if they're dead. And yet you've got to move because there's all this anti-tank fire and artillery fire that could, basically destroy your tank. This is a really tough operational environment for the tanks.
The Taylor quote is much more appropriate to a Sherman tank crew on Omaha Beach than anyone else. What are you going to do? You're going to just sort of go back and forth a few bits until you're hit by someone.
Yeah, or until the tides come in and overwhelm your tank, which you've got that factor too.
Do you know, I've never thought of that. But there is you can run, but you can't hide. I mean, there's nowhere to go.
Those tides are coming in really swiftly. There's nowhere to go. And so it's just like a little maze down there. So on one hand, let's say those 27 DD tanks get in safely. I do think that's more firepower. It's going to neutralize elements of WN-62, like maybe even the famous Heinz Severlo, on the machine gun or whoever else that's inflicting
not, as
casualties.
the case may be, yeah.
Or not, whatever he's doing. But I think it's possible you're going to save more lives because you've got more fire support, and maybe it's more intimidating for the Germans. But also, it's created more targets and a more crowded beach, and it's going to be even more tough place to operate and maneuver. As a tank driver, I guess you could think of it there. And the thing that still blows my mind after all these years is how on earth Jimmy Monteith was able to guide 2 tanks off the beach at like WN-60, which is like, if you've never been there, it's like the extreme eastern end of Omaha Beach. And like, it's basically you're on a beach. And then if you can imagine this sort of bluff, all of a sudden, it's about anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall, with sand and bramble and all that. And you're like, how would tanks maneuver off that? I still puzzle over that today. But clearly he did it. And that was absolutely key in what happens in that part of the battlefield. So tanks, I think, are a really crucial element of the whole fight and why it tends to go the Americans' way long term. But I think that also it's from a tanker's point of view, it's a really tough battle to survive. We all know the great Gene Sledge with the old breed, and our friend Henry, his son. Gene Sledge's older brother was a tank platoon leader in the 741st at Omaha Beach and was a big part of this fight.
I had no idea.
Oh, it's fascinating, Jimmy. I found his like after action report and all this, and it's really interesting from Lieutenant Sledge's point of view, what Omaha Beach looked like to him and the challenges he's facing. It's a completely different sort of element of the Sledge story in World War II. Here is Gene's older brother.
He told me he was in tanks, but he didn't tell me it was Omaha Beach. I mean, goodness me.
Yeah, he was at Omaha Beach, and he was a big part of that battle and was very fortunate to survive. Yeah, he was part of the 741st, I don't think the DD tanks, but the waiter tanks that come in on the LCTs.
They come in, yeah.
They start sort of these strong points start to fall one by one, and once you've got one, the whole thing starts to sort of unravel. It's slightly domino effect, isn't it?
It is, and fortunately there just aren't that many Germans there. 1,100, 1,200 on the whole expanse of the beach. So every guy they're losing, really degrades them pretty dramatically unless they're able to reinforce. Now, they'll do some reinforcing at Omaha Beach in the course of the day, but nowhere near enough. You might know they're going to get tied down fighting in Colville. They're going to try and hit the eastern flank above WN-60, and Lieutenant Monteith, who I mentioned a few moments ago, his platoon helped stave that off. So in the meantime, you've had some of the, like this would be within the first hour and a half of the invasion, you've had some of the first groups begin to get off the beach and start to really degrade the German defenses. I often compare them to like knives in the vitals probing around. So famously, of course, Lieutenant John Spaulding and Tech Sergeant Phil Stresik are certainly representative of that. Over on the 29th Division side, Brigadier General Coda really is leading some of the first troops who are going to come off the beach on that side. And that's basically going to be an envelopment around the Vierville Draw to the east, to the west.
We should explain that Coda is he's the second in command, the XO of the 29th.
Of the 29th Division, exactly. So he's in a very dangerous spot for a one-star general, but he leads like a squad or platoon leader in the course of the day. He's really quite remarkable. So he's going to kind of envelop sort of to the east and come up around behind the Vierville draw primarily. And then you're going to have people kind of envelop to the west at Pointe de la Percée, including some of the Rangers. Who are coming in. They're going to kind of come at it from that angle. And so they're just kind of working around to kind of probe and find the Germans that way, even as they're pummeling, say, WN-72 and its defenses and whatever. On the Big Red 1 side, Spalding, Streisick, Joe Dawson, and most of G Company within about 20 minutes of Spalding and Streisick. Over to the east, Monteith. A guy named Kimball Richmond is another key player who's the commander of I Company, but he really becomes a kind of a supernumerary de facto battalion commander in the course of the day, assembling the shards of 3 companies to again, kind of envelop up around WN-60, behind 61. Once you as a German soldier are aware that there are these American units operating on your margins or behind you, the nature of the battle really changes quite a bit. Spalding and Streisick, the biggest damage they do is against WN-64 and kind of 65. So what it means is if you're in those follow-on waves coming in at 9:30, 10, noon, whatever, that those defenses are less deadly. That's what simply has to happen for this thing to work. And so if you're one of those guys, you're in the middle of this small unit fight, very dangerous places beyond the beach. If you're back on the beach, the whole thing seems a disaster because you don't know what's happening with these other groups. If you're aboard a ship like General Bradley aboard Augusta getting these sort of fragmentary reports, there's a sort of portrait of, complete and total debacle that isn't really quite true, and Hubner too. Hubner's aboard ship almost the entire day. It's very much a small unit leader's battle in which you do have some people with rank like Coda, like Taylor. Willard Wyman is another one. He's the assistant division commander of the Big Red 1. All of them are going to have an effect, but really it tends to be the Richmonds, the Spaldings, the Streisicks who have the greatest effect more than anybody, I'd say.
At what point is Omaha secure though for the Americans? At what stage in the day would you say that they've done it?
That's a good question because I think it depends who you ask. You'll get a lot of different answers.
Well, of course. I mean, I was expecting that.
I think by mid-afternoon we can be said that we do control what matters on this beach. It doesn't mean it's safe, and there's really almost certainly by midday, like let's say by 2 p.m. or whatever, if you become a casualty at that point, it's almost certainly inflicted by artillery or by a mine. And what that tells us is that most of your immediate German opposition has either been killed or neutralized or is just trying to get the hell out of there. And so I think by that point in the day, once we have that kind of situation, we can say we control this beach. Now, it's still chaotic. It's not what we want out of it. It's going to be a bloody nightmare for the engineers to clear all those mines and build the roads and all this. And I think that, it's going to be, we're not going to get as far inland as we want, but we already know that with the way things had gone early in the morning. Now, some people will say, by late morning, once the destroyers come in and really neutralize the key pillboxes and all that, maybe we've got Omaha Beach. I am not quite that optimistic.
I've always been very much in that camp that it's kind of, it's all over. It's not over, but they're not going to lose by 10 o'clock. But you think slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to get pushed into the sea. If that means losing, they're not going to by 10 o'clock or so, right? I mean, yeah, I think so.
But it's still a tough fight. There's still lots of fighting going on, and don't forget, it's not just concrete bunkers, sort of perched on the bluffs. It's the defenses go inland. There's artillery pieces 2 miles behind, 1 mile behind. There's coordination bunkers further inland. It's thing. But I think Colville falls at like 2, doesn't it? The village.
Well, not really, because Colville is contested the rest of the night. And so especially G Company, Dawson's G Company, ends up fighting in and around Colville all the way until the next morning. Yes, the Germans have been weakened by then, but there are these sort of bicycle infantry that come into play later in the day, that adds to their presence in Colville. So I don't think we can be said to control the town, definitely, until the next day. And there's still some Germans around. The ironic and really tragic thing about the fight at Colville is the biggest damage we suffer is inflicted upon ourselves. I fully recognize the significance of the destroyers and the role they play on D-Day. They're absolutely incredible, and they are a major reason why the Americans win at Omaha Beach. But it's not a perfect weapon. It can cut both ways if the communications aren't what they need to be, and they're not. Most of the time on D-Day, the shore fire control parties are really not in communication with the ships and whatever else. And so you have this disconnect where some of the destroyers have orders that if they don't have definite word that Colville is in our hands by, I think 1800 hours, 6 o'clock in the evening, they basically just open fire on Colville. This happens even though G Company is there, and so they lose more killed to our own friendly naval gunfire than they do to the Germans in the course of the day. So Joe Dawson, the commander, as you can imagine, he was devastated by that. He never forgot it until his dying day. It was no one's fault particularly. It's just the way it goes in war sometimes, so it was extremely tragic.
We did 5 beaches in an hour, or a bit more than an hour the other day. To spend a little more time on Omaha has been absolutely fascinating, hasn't it, Jim?
Well, yeah, it really, really has. And the trouble is when you're doing a kind of a very quick dive onto one of the beach landings, you tend to be a little bit more gung-ho about it. You sort of go, it's a kind of sort of like, it's a high tide. It was all got a bit chaotic, but they got off and they were pushing inland. And, it all sounds like it's like a complete walkover. And obviously having that kind of level of nuance, I think, is really, really helpful, because Omaha was an incredibly tough fight. I think, they get to the point fairly early on comparatively early on in the day where they're not going to be kicked back into the sea. But as you point out, John, it's a really brutal fight throughout the day. And of course, there's all the fighting that goes on along that whole cliff front all the way up to Pont de Hoc until the morning of the 9th of June. So it's not like it's all over, and it's still extremely dangerous, and it's incredibly difficult. And one of the things I think is so impressive when you go to Omaha Beach is you look at those bluffs and you think, okay, well, I wouldn't want to be a German here facing all that offshore naval guns, but you sure as hell wouldn't want to be landing there from a landing craft.
And especially low tide.
You just wouldn't.
At low tide, that open ground, 500, 600 yards. It is extremely formidable. And so that's why you need all that supporting fire. I mean, that's why the destroyers are so vital there. Yeah, so it takes a lot of things to go right, I guess, for this to work. Being there as an assault troop, not terribly desirable, is it?
No thanks. I think we can conclude yet again that none of us would like to have gone through 10 seconds of that.
No.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of our D-Day series with John. And we'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
See ya.